Hello everyone, welcome to this press conference, as I said, for the launch of the new report, An Eye on Methane, Invisible but Not Unseen from the UN Environment Programme. My name is Beth Woodthorpe-Evans and I work at UNEP, and I'm pleased to be joined by this panel of speakers to share more on this new research. So to start with, we'll hear opening remarks from Inga Anderson, the Under-Secretary General of the United Nations and Executive Director of UNEP, Mr. Stephen Wenzel, Parliamentary State Secretary from the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action, and then our colleague also too from the EU, Mr. Tibor Stoblecki, sorry, I can't see your name on the screen, the EU Energy Ambassador will also share some remarks, and then we'll have a short presentation from Roland Coopers, the lead architect for the report, and the UNEP's International Methane Emissions Observatory. So without further ado, I'll pass the floor to Ms. Anderson.
Thank you very much, and good morning to members of the press. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me say that greenhouse gas emissions are at their highest level. 2024 is on track to be the warmest on record, and we've seen deadly climate impacts from wildfires that gut forests to flood that wash out homes and property and lives. So the next round of climate pledges under the Paris Agreement must dramatically and very quickly slash greenhouse gas emissions so that we can avoid overshooting 1.5 and cranking these impacts up to whole dimension of new levels. We saw in the emissions gap report that we saw an increase in 2023 by 1.3% of CO2 emissions. That is unacceptable. We need to see much more and much more active decrease. But action to reduce methane emissions, while we are still a hydrocarbon-dependent economy and society, has to play an absolutely strong role in this process. Under the Global Methane Pledge, we recall that nations promised to cut their emissions by at least 30% by 2030. This report by UNEP's International Methane Emissions Observatory, or IMEO, shows that while data-driven tools are ready, governments and companies must engage at scale to translate their pledges and insights that we get from IMEO into climate action. Through its Methane Alert and Response System, or MARS, the observatory has issued over 1,200 notifications about major methane plumes over the last 2 years. And we know that when action is taken, the results can be fast and impactful. In Algeria and Nigeria, 2 leaks were plugged after notifications were received. The relatively simple fixes have led to avoided annual emissions equivalent to around 1 million cars being taken off the road. So when we consider that only 1% of the 1,200 notifications that we issued resulted in a response, then you don't need to be a math genius to calculate the potential big wins here. We have proven systems to identify major methane leaks so that they can be quickly stopped, often with relatively simple repairs. We are quite literally at times talking about screwing bolts tighter or replacing filters, not always, but in some cases. Governments and oil and gas companies, on whom much of the world's economy still rely, must stop paying lip service to this challenge when answers are staring them right in the face. Instead, they should recognize the significant opportunity that this system presents and start responding to the alerts by plugging leaks that are spewing out climate warming methane into the atmosphere. And we know, of course, that methane is a shorter-lived but much more potent gas. So we need more credible data to guide these systemic changes across the fossil fuel sector, backed by the right policy and a legal enabling environment so that action follows. UNEP's Oil and Gas Methane Partnership 2.0 saw its membership rise to 140 companies, covering more than 40% of global production. Many of these companies have now reached the high standards of reporting on their emissions. But more data is still needed to drive impactful action, which is why the launch of the Eye on Methane data platform is very important. We need to look at other methane sources in waste and in agriculture and steel production to have the massive input. Let me stress, however, that cutting methane is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. We still need to decarbonize our economies and get that done fast. We need, therefore, to see action on the NDCs 3.0, and we need to see the G20 countries that are responsible for 77% of all emissions to take the lead, especially those with the longest historical trail of emissions. But that is the way that we will reduce overall emissions, and without the G20, we cannot do so. Cutting methane emissions is one of the simplest and fastest actions that we can take to slow the global temperature rise, while we do the hard, long work of decarbonization to happen, and we take that very fast so that we can avoid the very expensive adaptation costs. With 1.5 degrees now literally hanging by a thread, as per the latest UNEP's emissions gap report, governments and the private sector must turn the screw on methane emissions, and they must do so now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. I'll now pass the floor to Mr. Stelbacki, and we'll hear from the EU Energy Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me to apologize on behalf of Commissioner Kadri Simpson, who unfortunately was not able to be here with you due to other commitments and programs in the COP29. Open, reliable and actionable global methane emission data are necessary to drive impactful methane mitigation, making it crystal clear that we need IMO's guide us to or pass as transition away from fossil fuels. It's really amazing that in the last couple of years, IMO made impressive work in this field. The Oil and Gas Methane Partnership 2.0, the OGMP 2.0, has expanded over 140 members, now covering 42% of global oil and gas production. Just last year at the COP28, IMO launched the Methane Alert and Response System, MARS, and have already issued over 1,000 notifications, thereby catalyzing verified action to mitigate emission. Certified methane science studies across 19 countries have been concluded by the IMO, successfully filling the knowledge gaps. And on the top of all that, IMO has worked relentlessly on capacity building, driving collaboration between governments, industry, and key players to address systematic barriers to methane reduction. All at the same time, despite all of these strong efforts, we know that the estimates by 2024 Global Methane Tracker shows that the world is not on track to meet the targets of the Global Methane Pledge. On the contrary, methane emissions continue to increase, according to the International Energy Agency data. I think that's very much means that the IMO's report also demonstrates that the follow-up actions from the international community must dramatically increase to reduce methane emission. The report particularly highlights the underestimated emissions, unreported assets for OGMP 2.0, as well as a few responses to MARS notifications and lacking alignment on data collection and integration methods. In relation to the methane reduction, all stakeholders and all parties in the international community need to take its part. From the European Union side, the EU methane regulation entered into force in August this year is the first in the world to regulate methane emissions from imports and entirely built on the OGMP 2.0 standards. Additionally, early this week, the European Commission launched a new initiative, the Methane Abatement Partnership Roadmap, which provides a globally adaptable step-by-step blueprint for importer-exporter partnerships that can contribute to the reduction of methane emissions in energy sector. And the IMO will certainly be an important partner in tackling the implementation forward. We have 6 more years to implement our global methane pledge targets. And so, co-implementing body, we need IMO to lead the way on the data revolution that can turn commitments into actions. I therefore very much welcome not only the launch of this report, but also the new data platform and the Steel Methane program as well to spark further actions. IMO is a globally recognized body for dealing with methane emissions, and we must continue to join efforts in elevating IMO's effort and mission to collectively implement methane reduction to meet our Paris Agreement goals. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll now pass to Mr. Wenzel for his remarks too.
Dear colleagues, dear ladies and gentlemen, we know that methane is an extremely high global, has an extremely high global warming potential of at least 82 over the 20 years period and plays a critical role for reducing global warming. 30% of global warming already is due to methane emissions. Germany and the EU significantly reduced domestic methane emissions, and for example in one field with the energy and waste sector we could reduce the emissions of 90%, and this is a point where Germany had been successfully. And an important sector to tackle methane emissions is also the fossil fuel sector. The International Energy Agency assumes that 75% of methane emissions in the energy sector can be reduced by 2030 with low or zero costs. Our decision from Dubai and the global stocktake to transition away from fossil fuels is really important. I would like to take this opportunity and therefore encourage states to join also the No New Coal Pledge, which the Powering Past Coal Alliance will presenting next week. Or another good option is to anchoring coal phase out in the national DCs in the next period with more ambition in the new NDCs. Phase out is urgent, but until we phase out fossil fuels, we need to reduce the methane footprint of the remaining fossil production significantly. Germany phased out its coal production and is utilizing all of the remaining coal mine methane from closed mines. We encourage all former and remaining coal mining countries to follow this example. While on a rapid journey to fossil fuel phase out, Germany still imports fossil fuels today, and we are aware of our responsibilities for emissions that occur along the supply chain. As part of the European Union, we have taken an important step with the EU regulation on tracking and reducing methane emissions in the energy sector. This legislation is a clear signal to all producers of gas, oil and coal exporting to the EU market. We expect emission transparency, and transparency is a very important point, and we will set a maximum methane intensity level. The industry needs to adapt rigorous monitoring standards like level 5 of OGMP 2.0. Routine flaring and venting can and must be reduced massively within the next years. And we have so much clarity now, and we must act. And we will approach the gas and oil producers with Supply Germany and network operators and ask them to use immediately their options to reduce unnecessary emissions and leakage they can detect. Transparency in methane emissions is needed as a starting point. Data availability must be drastically improved, and this is why my ministry, the Ministry for Economy and Climate Actions, has last year made a commitment to supporting the International Methane Emission Observatory, the EMIO for short, and the Climate and Clear Air Coalition with 20 million euros for fund from the IKI. And so I hope that our joint work together will have good efforts to get the emissions down as fast as possible. Alongside counterparts from 6 countries, we have taken on the role of a global methane pledge champion to raise the awareness. So thank you very much for my colleagues here on the panel.
Thank you very much. I'll now pass to Mr. Kuppers for a short presentation, and then we'll have time for questions from the media.
So let me take you very quickly through a short presentation on IMEO, building on the points that my colleagues emphasized. So we're launching two things today, right? The report, Ion Methane, and the data platform, Ion Methane. And one more time, we cannot say it often enough, we do not choose between dealing with methane or CO2. It is very clear from the analysis that both are required, dealing with methane emissions and with CO2 emissions in order to meet the climate targets. So if we move on to our first tool set, OGMP, this has grown very substantially. As you've heard, we now have 140 members that covers 42% of the world's production. That's obviously not enough, but we're signing new companies every week. So it's growing rapidly. But what I want to point to you here with these pie charts is the big idea behind OGMP is to move the industry from estimated emissions to actual measurements at the site and at the source. And this is making an enormous difference because you cannot mitigate emissions if you do not know specifically what they are. And here you see the progress over the first 3 years in terms of the shift from estimations to measurements using tools. Next slide, please. The second big initiative in the toolkit is Mars. As mentioned, we've issued 1,200 alerts on UN letterhead, as it were. What we do is we take in the information from about a dozen methane satellites, integrate that data, validate it, and issue a notification. The disappointing thing so far has been a less than 1% response rate from governments, which is clearly, and companies, which is clearly not enough. It doesn't hide the good news that this can work, right? The poster child of emissions is Hassi Messaoud in Algeria, simply because it's easy to measure. And that has last week or 2 weeks ago has been eliminated. So it shows the power of this system is that if you follow on the notifications, you can make a major difference. Next slide, please. Let's skip this one in view of time. So the platform, we have an enormous amount of data. We can make some of it public, but we also have an enormous treasure trove of data which we use in order to engage with governments and companies. But we're proud to announce today a substantially enhanced platform which will give you access to 3 sets of data. One is the Mars plumes, these 1,200 plumes, and in fact, there's thousands of other plumes that we've not notified, but they are on the platform. The second thing is there's information from the OGMP companies, which ones are gold standard, which ones are not, where are their assets, etc. And the third thing is the rich set of scientific studies that we do, and this is now all in one place. This is the first iteration. It'll get better every week. Next, please. And so with that, I want to conclude. You know, we hope that this issue continues to receive the attention that it deserves. Let's use the time for your questions, because that's obviously the critical thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll take some questions. Please state your name and outlet before asking. I can see a question just here, the gentleman in the black.
Oh, hi there. You've asked me to stand up. Here I am. Damien Carrington from The Guardian. Thanks very much to everybody for this really interesting presentation. Specifically on the sort of 1% response, can you give us some examples, or the list even, of the countries or companies that responded? And then secondly, Turkmenistan and the US are highest in terms of the number of alerts that they received. Can you tell us whether those countries or companies in those countries responded? Thank you.
Yes, in other words, we can give you a list. It's because we disclose the information, so we can also give you the aggregate. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, obviously, but that is public information, which we're happy to share.
But we can mention that Nigeria, Algeria, and Azerbaijan were countries where urgent action was taken, or remediation action was taken, and I think my colleague just gave you one example from Algeria leak. But we will be happy to provide you with the details as per what is available. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think there's a question just here in the middle of the floor.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Melina Walling with the Associated Press. Given the low response rate, I'm just wondering if you can talk about whether naming and shaming, as it were, these companies and countries that aren't responding, do you think that works? And what do you think of Gore's Climate Trace program?
I think part of it is to make available to countries more data and information, both in the public as well as directly to the countries. Make greater awareness, so there's public pressure, which is why this data platform is very critical. Media will write about it and countries will understand that this is something that cannot be swept under the carpet. So whenever you shine a light on something and media helps in that regard, then it becomes action. But we also have to understand that it has been, whether we like it or not, standard practice. These leaks have gone undetected and unremarked upon, and it is now no longer possible. The eye in the sky, so to speak, thanks to the generous funding from many sources, are providing information to the world. And so that response, and therefore the remediation action, becomes something that we will continue from the United Nations Environment Programme through our EMEO, through our Mars, and through the pledge, shine a light on, which is why we are publishing this report. This is the third such report, Eye on Methane, and we will not relent. We also are very much insisting that countries in submitting their NDC 3.0, that those, especially since we can now show in the public setting their emissions, that they include that in their 3.0. And this is an easy thing compared to changing the very energy infrastructure of a country. Thank you.
Thank you. And then another question just here at the back.
Hi, Gloria Dickey with Reuters. I'm just wondering if you had any estimate of what you thought the response rate would be when you were launching this platform. Thank you.
No. So we'd expected it to have been substantially higher, but it's essentially a discovery process. I mean, given the fact that many of these countries are signatory of the Global Methane Pledge, we expect and continue to expect the response rate to be higher, but we didn't put a number on it. When we engage with OGMP companies, we actually, because it's people we know, the response rate is substantially higher because it's built on existing relationships. So those relationships will grow and the response rate will grow, as well as you paying attention to it.
Great. If no final questions, we'll end there. The report is available on unep.org and all the details are there. And thank you for your attention today, and we'll hear more.
I just want to thank the two partners sitting next to me. This is only made possible through the generous contributions from donors, including, of course, the European Commission, as well as the government of Germany, as well as, please, Roland, the other donors.
Yes, the other government donors are the United States, Canada, and Australia, and we have a number of philanthropic donors: the Global Methane Hub, the Bezos Earth Fund, as well as Google.org, and so all gratefully acknowledged.